Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
One second, there is some echo. One second.
Morning, sir.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so welcome to the last day of this workshop. Before we start, a few announcements. Today afternoon, we are going to have an interesting discussion session on the future of construction. So if you go to the exercise page, towards the end, you find a link to the exercise. So you see an image here, which is about the future of construction. And if you have any points to discuss, for example, related to the use of machine learning for any of these technologies, you can post your questions here. In the afternoon, Professor Koshi will moderate this discussion on how we can use these advanced technologies, computing technologies for modernizing construction. So you can fill it in whenever you get time today. Then in the afternoon, you will also have a short quiz, just 10 questions, multiple choice questions to understand what you have learned from this workshop. So that I will post just before the quiz. So just remember that, and if you want, you can revise everything we have covered. All the video recordings are already on the uploaded here. So if you click on this, you get to the YouTube channel where all the recordings are already there. So you can go through this in the today during the break. Today afternoon we'll start a bit late, so you can have some extra half an hour for revision. So at 2:30, instead of 2, we'll meet at 2:30. You can go through the videos if you like and prepare for the quiz. I'm making it look like a very serious affair. It's a simple quiz, but I want you to prepare and write. Okay, so I think we will continue. So we have today morning, I'm going to take up to 11. I'm going to take a session to cover the remaining topics in the machine learning. And 11 o'clock, we'll have a presentation by Professor Bharadwaj Mantha.
So this your voice is breaking, sir. We are unable to hear you properly.
Oh, let me see what I can do.
It seems okay for me.
No, sir, it's clear for me. It's okay.
It's okay. I'm using my laptop. Yesterday I was using my. Okay, I can use my.
Your voice is clear, sir.
Is it clear?
Voice is clear, sir.
Okay. Yeah, otherwise, I can use the one which I used yesterday. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I will turn off the video. That will take some bandwidth. Okay, so at 11 o'clock, we'll have a session by the Professor Bharadwaj Mantha from the Sharjah University. and he will present some applications of machine learning. So that is what we have planned for today. So let me share my screen. Okay, so we have completed our discussion on neural network, and after that on decision trees. And I just quickly mentioned about random forest. These are very advanced topics, very popular topics today. Now, for completeness sake, we have two more learning techniques. So I classified it as rote learning, statistical learning. So everything we have covered so far are examples of statistical learning techniques. Now, the next one is deductive learning. There may not be a lot of applications in engineering, but I'm just doing it for completeness sake. This relates more to formal logic and theorem proving. The idea is that instead of providing data in the form of cases, you define the complete knowledge in the form of rules or operators or some formal representation of knowledge. And using this knowledge, it is able to deduce new pieces of knowledge. An example is by the knowledge, using the knowledge that square of any number is greater than or equal to 0, you will be able to reason that x squared plus y squared less than 0 doesn't have any solution. So this type of proving facts using theorems is the topic of deductive learning. It's more complex. It has applications, but it's very difficult to use. So we won't go into more details about how these are done. Definitely mathematicians and people who are interested in proving theorems will be interested in this form of learning. The last one is exploration and discovery. The earliest example of this is a program called AM. And it's a program written in a Lisp language, interLisp language, by somebody called Lennart. He developed it while he was doing his PhD. And what he has shown is by having some initial definition of, for example, the operators in set theory, he showed that the program can explore and discover new pieces of knowledge. So he showed that it automatically learned the concept of addition, multiplication, and several operators in set theory. Even though it was not explicitly stored in the knowledge base, he had only the initial definition of a few concepts in set theory. It learned a lot of interesting concepts which human beings discovered themselves. So these concepts that humans discovered were discovered by this program. So people say, it's a very intelligent, interesting program. But what I find surprising is that all the discoveries were made by this program when Lennart was doing his PhD. After he finished his PhD, there is no record of any new concept learned by the program. So I have some doubts about, how it works. But nevertheless, it's an interesting idea that the program can explore by itself and discover new facts. And today we have some learning techniques which make use of this concept. For example, we saw that reinforcement learning has this element of exploration and exploitation. So it can explore the solution space. What are possible? You define all the rules of the game, all the operators that are in the game, and it can try out new things by itself. And during this process of exploration, it might discover certain things which can make use of later on. We call it as exploitation. So this is so this learning technique has some element of exploration. And today you also hear about genetic programming. It's different from genetic algorithm, but a different, but a similar concept. You define operators, genetic operators, and by combining these different operators, it's able to do things. And they have demonstrated it in the case of design. You can develop a creative design solution by exploration and discovery. So there are these things. It's now the distinction between optimization, machine learning is quite blurred when it comes to these kind of ideas. But in general, and as I mentioned to somebody who wrote to me, most machine learning machine learning algorithm involves some kind of optimization. You need to do some optimization. We saw some example in the case of regression. In the case of classification, we formulate it as an optimization problem. And you can use general purpose optimization algorithms for solving these problems. So that is the link between machine learning and optimization. Optimization is more basic. It is a tool for helping in machine learning. Yeah. Okay, so that covers all the four types of the learning techniques. Now we go a little more deeper into learning nonlinear relationships. In the case of regression, we saw that we may not always be able to find a straight line that fits all the data, a hyperplane that fits all the data. Data might be nonlinear. So how do you handle nonlinearity? Similarly, in the case of classification, we saw we can use a hyperplane which separates the positive and the negative classes. But in general, the decision surface need not be a straight line. It need not be a hyperplane. It need not be linear. You can have a nonlinear decision surface separating the positive from the negative. So we need to look at how we can learn this type of nonlinear relationships in the data. So the basic concept is like this. We learn in the feature space. So if you have the original variables, x1, x2, xn, these are the raw input variables. If you learn in that space of the original input variables, we learn a linear decision boundary, a linear relationship. But now we can think about using some derived features, using the original the variables x1, x2, and so on. You create a new features. Let us say one feature is called phi1, which is a function of x, function of the original variable. Phi2 is another function of the variables, and so on. So you create m new features. This m will be different from n in general. So we learn extract new features, m new features from the original input variables. These features could be linear features, like in the case of PCA. PCA was, we found it is a linear combination of the original input variables. So it's a linear feature, but you can also learn nonlinear features. For example, x1 squared. I'll take this one, for if you want to learn a quadratic relationship, so you can compute features x1 squared, x2 squared, and so on. So these become the new variables which we use in the machine learning. Instead of using the original variable x1, x2, now we can use these new variables. If you want, you can call it f1, f2, and so on. So these new variables, which are computed using the original input variables, these are used in learning, and we can repeat exactly the same machine learning algorithm with the new features, and it will learn in the feature space. So this is the idea of learning in the feature space. So even linear regression can be done in the feature space using nonlinear features. And the result is that it will be able to learn the nonlinear relationships. Now, some questions to think about. How many elements are there in the feature vector when there are n input variables in a quadratic relationship? You think about all this. The general idea I want to tell you is that In general, this is not learning in the feature space could be very complex because the number of features could explode as you increase the degree of the polynomial. So if you have n variables with nth degree polynomial, you can easily show that there will be 2 to the power n number of terms in your expression, 2 to the n number of features. This is a large number. It increases exponentially with respect to n. So we have a big problem. It explodes very fast. And then if you have so many features, that means it has probably as many weight, the free parameters in your model, weight factors. So you need large amount of data if it has to learn all the features correctly. So it's not always very practical. So it results in overfitting and results in all kinds of problems that we discussed earlier. Now, these features need not be just numeric. You can also use it for symbolic data. So I've given a small example here in the domain of text classification, document classification. This is another big area, just like face recognition, image recognition. Text classification is a very important area. This is exactly what Google and all the search engines are doing this text classification, grouping documents into similar groups and trying to classify it and so on. So this has a lot of applications. So I have taken a simple example here. Let's say you have number of documents. You are a project manager. You are to manage a lot of documents. And you have these hundreds of documents describing various aspects of something. And let us say it contains these documents, contain these texts. One document contains the text construction management, another one management, then construction industry, construct buildings. So you have all this. And for in a particular situation, you want to search for something. And you get all these documents and you rate the relevance of these documents. So you give some score. 1 is the maximum, 0 is the minimum. Depending on the relevance, you give the score. Now, suppose I want to learn from this data. So in the future, if I want to search for a particular term, I want to make use of this feedback to find out what is relevant. So this is a text classification problem. So for this problem, we can use features. We cannot, if you take the original variables, probably this is the text itself. You have text of different length here, which is not enough to find out what is the relevance of this document. So what you can do is you can extract features from this. So the feature vector could be a list of keywords or word stems that can be used to determine the relevance of the document, to determine the score for the document. So in the text classification literature, you will see many different techniques, very useful techniques which you can use. Just to quickly summarize what we can do, we can take, instead of using whole words, we can use word stem. This is what is used by many classification algorithms. Instead of searching for the entire word construction, probably you search for the stem of that word construct, and maybe manage instead of the full word management. So you create a set of features, in this case keywords, which you can search. So your feature vector could be something like a vector consisting of say a few keywords: construct, manage, industry, building. So this will be your feature vector, and the value of these could be binary, that whether the particular word stem is present in the document or not. Or you can even have a count how many times the word comes in the document. So now we have converted this into numbers. Even though the original one is just a symbol or text, we convert it into a feature vector which can take numbers. And now we can use this feature vector as the input variables in your classification algorithm or regression algorithm. So you can perform machine learning in the feature space where the features are word stems, which are relevant for a text classification problem. So depending on the application, we need to select good features which have meaning to the application, and that determines the success of the learning algorithm. Unless we use our domain knowledge to find out good features, the machine is not going to work. If you just try to learn in the original raw data space consisting of the original input variable, it's not going to work very well. For any application, we need to select good features which are relevant to the application. Only then the machine learning algorithm will be able to perform well. So now we have discussed about learning in the feature space. So I'll introduce support vector machines. It's also a very popular machine learning algorithm. It was developed mostly by Vapnik. It's fairly recent. If you look at artificial neural network, it is from the 1960s. So this is very recent. In 1992, this algorithm was published. But if you go back and look at it, you'll see that Vapnik has already published similar ideas in the 1970s. So these ideas were there already in the 1970s, just became popular, and people became aware of this in the 1990s, and then it exploded. In the 90s, everybody was using support vector machines. Before deep learning became popular, support vector machine used to be the most popular algorithm. And there's a reason for that. It is based on a statistical learning theory. There is a firm mathematical foundation for support vector machine, whereas all the previous techniques were based on heuristics. You cannot mathematically prove the performance of the algorithm, whereas support vector machines have very firm mathematical foundations. It works reliably. We'll see some of these characteristics. And vector machine can be used for classification as well as regression. But I'm just going to explain how it works in the case of classification, just to give you some idea about how it works. We don't have time to go into the details of all the different techniques in support vector machines. It itself could be as a full semester course in computer science. So it's not possible to cover it in 1 hour here. So just quickly explain how it is used for classification, and whether you use it for classification or regression, the techniques are very similar. Only the mathematical model is different. We are going to see a support vector classification. I said it can also be used for regression, but I'm just taking this as an example. So support vector machine constructs a hyperplane in high or infinite dimensional. We learn in the feature space to separate data into classes. And one important theory of the result that has come from statistical learning theory is that you get the best generalization if you select what is called as the maximum margin hyperplane. I will explain this with an example. So this is, as I mentioned, this is based on statistical learning theory. So this theory looks at, what is the reliability of the learned function, whether there is overfitting, whether it can predict correctly in the future situation. So there is a theory based on statistics and probability. So based on this, we can look at, how you can minimize generalization errors. So this theory is called the Vapnik-Chervonenkis theory. And the important result, as I just mentioned, generalization errors depend on the functional margin of the learned hyperplane. Margin is nothing but the distance of the point from the hyperplane. So this is that exercise you did. So it was very interesting. A lot of you have drawn a lot of random lines. Is good. At heart, we are all children. So I see like children play with toys. You have played with that document, but it is good. So this is the example I gave. You have a set of negative examples here, and you have a set of positive examples here. And the question is, what separates the negative from the positive? Is there a function which separates the negative from the positive? And I asked you to draw the function. So you can see there is this line. It's a very good line. It clearly separates the negative from the positive. But even if shift the line a bit to this side or to this side, you can see it still separates all the positive and negative points. But what is the best separation? Will you select this point, this line 1 or 2 or 3? Which is better? Can somebody give your answer? So we have 3 options, 3 parallel lines. Which is the best separator, discriminant?
It's one, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, people have written 1. Okay, 3, no. I would say, well, the 1 is the correct answer. Because you can see that 3 is close to the positive point. 2 is close to the negative point. 1 is somewhere in between. So if you select 1 as the line which separates the positive from the negative, even intuitively you can see, it's symmetric. You have the equal distance from the positive and the negative. But what the statistical learning theory is, the maximum the distance of the hyperplane from the nearest positive and negative point, you have better generalizability. If the hyperplane is too close to the point, you might get another point very close by and it will be misclassified. Whereas if there is a big separation, there is a big distance between the hyperplane and the nearest point, that means that there is a good separation, so you may not cause any misclassification in the future. The chances of misclassification is very less. So this is what was formally proved using the statistical learning theory. So if you want to learn now, what about these inclined lines? You can see that inclined lines are not good because they are closer to some of the data points. So it has to be one of these 3 straight lines. So according to the statistical learning theory, we need to maximize the functional margin of the hyperplane, which is nothing but the distance of the point from the hyperplane, which you can find by taking the dot product, W times X. Actually, the Wx plus B equal to 0 is the hyperplane. And for a given point, if you take Wx plus B, that will be the distance of the point from the hyperplane. You're taking the dot product from the hyperplane. So that is the parameter which we need to maximize. So now we can formulate an optimization problem in which you maximize the margin. So you calculate what is the margin for each data point. Earlier we just took it as you took the objective function as minimizing the number of points that are misclassified. That is not a very good objective function because you can get any hyperplane which is inclined. We have not brought in the idea of functional margin. Whereas now we can formulate another objective function in which we explicitly maximize the margin. So for each data point, you compute the margin and you maximize the margin, find the hyperplane which has the maximum distance. So we can write it as an optimization problem. So it reduces to a quadratic optimization problem subject to a set of linear constraints. This quadratic optimization problem is interesting because you can show that a quadratic optimization problem with linear constraint has a unique solution. It doesn't have local minima. So if you use some iterative procedure for solving it, you will not get stuck in local minima. You'll always get the global minima. So the optimization is very reliable. So that is the primary reason why people are using support vector machine, because if you take something like artificial neural network, it ends up with an objective function which is non-linear, which is not quadratic, and it might get stuck in local minima. We saw these iterative procedures might get stuck in local minima, whereas support vector machines don't have this kind of a problem because the objective function is smooth, it is convex, and you can show that there is only one global solution, global minimum, which is the same as the local minimum. So you take any local optimization procedure, you get the global, the minimum of the objective function. And then the result, we won't go into the mathematics. I'll just explain the result. So what you get is that the final weight vector W is obtained as a linear combination of all the input variables. So xi is an input variable. First data point, xi, x1 is the vector consisting of variables in the first data point, x2 is the next one, and so on. So if you arrange all the data points as column vectors, the weight vector is just a linear combination of all the input vectors. So we write it as summation over all the data points, alpha I, yi, xi. Alpha I is the coefficient. It's nothing but the Lagrange multiplier. If you're familiar with the Lagrangian formulation of optimization problem. So you get the alpha I, which are the coefficients of the ith variables in ith data points. And the weight vector is a linear combination of all the input vectors. Now what we will see is that most of the alpha I are equal to 0. These are the coefficients for each of the data points. And you will see that alpha is 0 for most of the points. Only for a few points, alpha is non-zero. So the weight vector is a linear combination of just a few input data points, which is what we call as the support vectors. So if you take, okay, so just about the mathematics, we won't go into the details. So we can write down the objective function which you want to minimize, the loss function, as a quadratic optimization problem using dual variables. The original decision variables are W and B, we saw earlier. But now we can write it in a different form using the Lagrangian formulation in the form of Lagrange multipliers. These become the new variables, and you can write the objective function in terms of the new dual variables. And this is the objective function which you want to minimize. And what I want you to notice is that this term, xi comma xj, dot product of the ith and jth data point, there is a summation over all the data points. So this is the objective function which you're trying to minimize. And the final function which you obtain is like this. So this W is a linear combination of all the input variables. If you substitute, you get the function, the prediction, that is the class label, can be written as earlier the summation over all the data points xi comma x plus b. This is the form you get for support vector machine. Now, if you come back to this example, if you do this, after you solve the optimization problem, what you will see is this hyperplane number 1, which you identified as the best one, can be written as a linear combination of just 3 input vectors. Probably these are this point, this positive point, and these 2 negative points, which lie closest to the hyperplane. So the hyperplane is determined uniquely by just 3 support vectors, 3 input data points, which are called the support vectors. So you can write down the equation to this hyperplane as some coefficient alpha 1 times this x1, which is this point, plus you can write alpha 2 times x2, which is probably this support vector, plus alpha 3 times x3. So this weight vector can be written as a linear combination of just 3 support vectors. All the remaining input data points don't influence the hyperplane at all. That's why it is called a support vector machine. The decision surface is supported by a few data points, which are called support vectors. So in essence, this is the thing. So in turn, compared to neural network, we have a mathematical model, which is a quadratic optimization problem. By solving this optimization problem, you get a set of factors, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, and so on, which are the Lagrange multipliers. And you can write down the weight vector as a linear combination of all the support vectors. And the decisions, the surface itself can be written as a linear combination of the the dot product of the support vector point to the given point. So this is the function. Now, one more important characteristic is that in all the equations, whether it is in the objective function or in the decision function, you always find the dot product xi comma xj. You put in angle bracket, now denoting it is it's a dot product. So you're always taking a pair of data points, taking the dot product. The dot product is something like the similarity. If two vectors are aligned perfectly, if it is normalized, if it's a unit vector, if two vectors are aligned perfectly, you get dot product of 1. If they are perpendicular to each other, the dot product is 0. So in a way, the dot product represents the similarity between two data points, whether the data points are perfectly aligned with each other or not. So it involves the Lagrangian, the optimization objective function, as well as the decision function, depends only on the similarity between a given data point and the support vector. So if you want to find out whether a point X is positive or negative, according to the prediction by the support vector machine, you take when you do this, you take the dot product, alpha I, yi, dot product of xi comma x. You are computing what is the similarity of the new data point with each of the support vectors, and whether the point is positive or negative depends on the similarity of the new point with this support vector. So that is the important idea from support vector machine. Any questions so far?
Sir, what are the limitation of this quadratic equations? Linearly separable, it is easy because we can find out the linear equation. But in the case of quadratic polynomials of degree m, then the computation power might be high, and the taking decision, because in linear separable we have only one line to take the decision, which is so-called decision line. But in this quadratic programming or in this quadratic polynomial, how do we take a decision? Means how do we define the line in that sense? So what is your comment in this?
Yeah, so in what you said is correct. In the case of straight line, it is very simple. You have it's not a straight line. It is a hyperplane in n dimension, but still it has a lower order complexity. But now, if you use quadratic the terms, you will see that the number of terms increase according to n squared. If there are n variables, you have n squared number of quadratic terms. So there are more number of parameters, the complexity is much higher. So here actually I have shown the decision, the decision boundary as a straight line. You can see, this is the decision boundary is a straight line. Now, if you use a quadratic expression, you get a decision surface which is curved in the input space. And if you use higher order polynomial, again you have the surfaces which are more complex. So in general, as you increase the degree of the polynomial, the complexity of the problem is increasing quite a lot. And the possibility that you might learn the wrong relationship is much higher. Is the same problem of overfitting we saw earlier. Right? So in general, the complexity of the problem increases as you increases the degree of the polynomial. But in some cases, we cannot help it, because a linear the decision surface is not able to separate the two classes. So you have to look for a nonlinear decision surface. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay,
hello,
so,
sir.
Yeah.
Sir, can it possible we will separate the particular data set in a 2 or 3 types? Like, it can possible to have more than one hyperplane?
Right. Yes. Right. So that is possible. So that is actually in the random forest. This is exactly what is done. We also talk about regression trees. This is also the similar idea. So it is you separate the data into subsets, and these subsets are separated using hyperplanes. So if you look at globally, when you look at it, you will see multiple hyperplanes separating the data set. So there are algorithms which can do this, especially these ensemble type of algorithms. They make use of this idea, you separate it and then you can have the multiple the predictors.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so now
Professor, just last question.
Yeah.
Why SVM is so famous while deploying in construction industry? I mean, especially if we intend to use AI. So I see a lot of paper which has used SVM along with many other methods, but SVM seems to be very famous. What could be the reason?
In the 90s, it became really famous. Now I'm not so sure. But the reason is that optimization is reliable. Whereas all the other techniques, it's by chance that you end up with the correct relationship. But here, because it's a quadratic optimization problem, you can be sure that it doesn't get stuck in local minima. So it becomes more efficient to find the optimal weight factors because it's a quadratic optimization problem. So that is the primary reason. The other is what I'm going to discuss now, the use of kernels. It is not just for a linear decision boundary. You can also learn nonlinear decision surfaces without having the problems associated with higher order polynomials. So this is the idea I'm going to discuss now. And I think this is probably the most important reason and the use of kernel, the possibility to use kernel functions for the machine learning. So the idea is like this, in all the operations, whether it is in the formulation of the objective function or in the prediction, you always find the term dot product of xi comma xj. So what people have done is, now if you want to calculate the similarity between 2 points, instead of taking the dot product xi comma xj, we can use another function, can be a different function, k of xi comma x. So a k of xi comma xj, where k is called as a kernel function. A kernel function is some function which computes the similarity between two data points. And the simplest kernel function is nothing but the dot product xi comma xj. And you can also define more complex kernel functions. And these kernel functions they represent the similarity between two data points. And all that you need to do for learning in the feature space is define a kernel function. So summarize a kernel function takes two arguments, two data points. It computes the similarity between the vectors xi and x. The simplest kernel is nothing but the dot product of xi and x. More complex kernels could be polynomials. There are many other things I'm just going to talk about in a short while. So you have the different ways of defining the kernel, and the kernel can be selected according to the meaning of the application, according to the meaning of the variables. So for text classification, we can select a particular kernel which might be very relevant for that application. For image processing, we can define a kernel. For other the domains where you have certain kind of nonlinear relationship, we can define an appropriate kernel and so on. So we can select the kernel according to the application. Basically, you are computing or you are defining a function which measures the similarity between two different points, which measures the distance between two different points. So this can be done by experts, and depending on how you define this kernel, you can make a big difference to the way the function is learned. So this is the reason why people are using support vector machines. So for text classification domain, people have already defined very good kernels. Similarly, for image recognition, people have defined kernels. So these kernel methods have become very popular, and you can easily integrate this into support vector machine, because all you need to do is wherever there is a dot product, you just replace it by the kernel function. So this is the idea of a kernel, and unfortunately, we don't have time to go through it in more detail. I'm just introducing you the concept. So to summarize, the support vector machine is a kind of machine learning technique in which you formulate a quadratic optimization problem. In the case of classification, this is the maximal margin classification. That is one of the ways of formulating the objective function. There are also other support vector machines. See this, the maximal margin works only when the data set is clearly separable. There is no mixture of negative and positive. It assumes that there is a hyperplane which separates the negative from the positive. Only in such case you can use the maximal margin concept. Now there in practice, data is always mixed. You may not be able to find a hyperplane which can clearly separate the negative from the positive. So for that case, there are other techniques like epsilon insensitive loss function and so on. You say that if there is a small misclassification, it doesn't matter, you ignore it. So there are other formulations. Again, these are mathematically defined. You define the objective function and it ends up in a similar form. The final solution is always a linear combination of the support vectors, and in all the steps we only take the dot product, so you can easily replace the dot product with the kernel function. So these are some characteristics of every support vector machine, whether it's for regression or classification. And even for classification, there are different models where the objective function is different. Okay, so this completes the lecture on the machine learning technique. Now, just a little bit about the software tools. If you are familiar with Python, we have PyTorch. There are a lot of freeware, the toolkits available, which we can use, especially with the Python. That's why Python is very popular for machine learning. The MATLAB is not free. It is free for students. But if you are familiar with MATLAB, there is a statistics machine learning toolkit which you can use. My students are using MATLAB, so these are also very good options. Most of the learning technique, whether it's support vector machine or other kinds of regression or classification, you will find toolkits, libraries available in MATLAB. So this is another possible option. TensorFlow was acquired by Google. It is another one, especially for image classification. And this is also something very interesting. Colab, just go to the colab.google.com. You'll see that you can set up a machine learning program in something like the sheet, and you can solve it, and you can make use of the cloud computing resources of Google. You can use GPUs and so on, depending on availability. So this is another possibility if you want to try out some machine learning problem. You can make use of these free tools available from Google. And R is another programming language. A lot of people are using it. I've not used R myself. I don't know how it looks like, but I know a lot of people are using it. So this is just some pointers to the software you can use for machine learning. So if I stop here and move on to the next lecture, which is the last one, we'll have just time to just have an overview of deep learning. Okay, any questions related to what I covered just now? I went too fast, I know, because now this is my last session. So I want to complete this before 11 o'clock. And afternoon, we have the discussion session and then the quiz and all that. So I went very fast, but
can you point it out some applications which you have covered so far? For example, support vector machine, the text analytics. through which we can apply in the construction, and we can find out some areas and do the research in that area. So some applications which you like that this is a promising area, we can apply these techniques
Right.
into this.
So Aparna presented the application on activity recognition. So that is one important application. Even and I also showed some applications of image recognition, image processing, whether it is for inserting reinforcement rods into 3D printed concrete or for automated connection of steel modules. You can use image recognition, take images, you learn to recognize features like folds and other objects. So these are other applications. Then in data sensing also there are, in fact, this is the topic of our discussion today afternoon, where we can use machine learning, So this, I've already posted it in the website of the workshop. So take a look at it. This is exactly what we are going to discuss in the afternoon, where we can apply all these. SVM can be used to solve the regression problem. Yes, definitely. It is a particular, it's not the ordinary least squares regression, but there are other formulations where you can use support vector regression. It can be done. Any other questions? Okay, so let us move on to the deep learning. So there are many deep learning models today. The most popular, I would say, are CNN, Convolution Neural Network, and LSTM. LSTM is more for time series data. CNN has been proposed originally for image classification, for image processing applications. But I'll show later on that you can use CNN even for time series data. So this is one example. We are not going to cover everything. Just to give you some idea about what is deep learning, because you hear about it quite a lot today. People say it works kind of magic. So we will see exactly what this is. We will try to demystify some of the ideas surrounding deep learning. Basically, a deep learning network is just an artificial neural network. It's a multi-layered artificial neural network. It's just that you have too many layers. You have many layers. It's not a perceptron network with 2 layers. You have many hidden layers. So it is a kind of artificial neural network. And when you have more layers, we saw that it can represent nonlinear relationships. Now, here is something that looks like magic. Features are extracted automatically from raw data. When I talked about support vector machine, I said, kernels can be used to represent domain knowledge. You select features that are important to the application by defining the kernels. One thing I forgot to mention is a kernel function can be written as a dot product of the feature vectors. So in the simplest kernel I said is the dot product of xi, comma xj. But another way of defining a kernel is phi I, comma phi j, dot product of phi I, comma phi j, where phi I and phi j are feature vectors instead of input data vectors. So by defining the kernels, you are defining the similarity between features. You're taking the dot product of the feature vector I and j, phi I and phi j. So by defining the kernel, you are implicitly defining what are the features that are important for the application. So as I said, for the learning to work correctly, if you're using support vector machine, the key is you have to find appropriate features. If you use the dot product as the kernel function, it can represent only linear the features. But if you use other kernel functions, you might be able to learn nonlinear decision surfaces represented by these features. But now in CNN, we say that features are extracted automatically. Users don't need to tell what features are important. it is extracted automatically from raw data. We'll see why people say this, whether it works or not, we'll see. And developed initially for image processing, and you can also use SVM in the last layer. People have done that to improve the efficiency of learning. We look at this particular characteristics of this particular application, the image processing. We'll take an example first, so you understand what exactly we are trying to do with image recognition. So what I have shown here is a bitmap image consisting of 32 pixels in the X direction and 32 pixels in the Y direction. So you have a matrix of pixels, and each pixel can take a value. So if it is a black and white image, it is either 0 or 1. And so I have shown the 32 by 32 pixel. If you multiply 32 by 32, you get 1024. So you have almost 1000 variables, which are nothing but the pixel values, which can take either 0 or 1 in the case of a black and white image. And here I have shown a rectangle. So you can see this rectangle. So these pixels are black. Let us say you have pixel value of 0. And all the other pixel values are 1, standing for white. So this image containing a rectangle consists of certain pixel values of 0, and remaining pixels are 1. Now, if you want to find out rectangles, the images which contain rectangles, probably what you can look for is look at all the pixel values, see whether these pixel values match what you have in this data set. So now if you try to formulate it as a classification problem, how many variables are there? Suppose this is a classification problem. You have one image I have shown here. Similarly, you have other images. So each one is a data point. So how many variables are there in the problem?
Thousand 24.
Right. You have 1024 variables. So you have an input data vector containing 1024 variables, which take values 0 or 1. So you have one data point consists of 1024 values for these variables. And then the next data point, again, you might have a different set of values for these variables and so on. So you might have a number of such data points. And then you want to classify these images into two categories, the images which contain rectangles and the images which do not contain rectangles. So that is the classification problem. So now I have shown a lot of other images here, some examples of other images which contain rectangles. So if you consider the first and second image, this is the first one, this is the second one, you see the rectangle is shifted slightly to the right. And in the third image, the rectangle is shifted in the Y direction. And you can see, there are different transformation. Either the rectangle has moved in the X and Y direction, or here you can see the rectangle is rotated. It doesn't look like a rectangle because of the pixelation, but because of the accuracy you can get with these pixels, this is the only thing you can do. When you rotate, you can get a slightly different shape. So you have different images of rectangles which have undergone different kinds of transformation, and all these are examples of rectangles. And an image classification the program should be able to detect rectangle, whatever might be the image. But if we just compare the values of the raw input variables, you will see that the values of input variables are going to be completely different. For example, for this image, this pixel value is 0, whereas here, even though there is a rectangle here, that pixel value is 1. Okay? Some other pixel values have become the 0 in the second image. So you will see that if you compare the raw input variables, all the variables are going to be completely different. The values of variables are going to be completely different. So if you use the raw input variable, it may not learn correctly. You have to extract features from these images and use that for classification. For example, if you use something like a decision tree, like the ID3 algorithm, it will try to find out which variable has the same value for all the data points, and it won't find any pixel which is common among all the data points. So it may not be able to form the decision tree correctly because it uses the raw input variable to separate the data into subsets, which is not able to do. But now if you look at some features which are important to the application, it will be able to learn much better. So now coming back to image processing. So the raw input variables are the color values for each pixel. We took the example of black and white, so it had only two values, 0 or 1. But if it's a color image, we discussed this before, we can separate it into two channels, red, green, and blue. And for each of these channels, we can have values from, let us say, 0 to 255. If you use 8 bits to represent one color, and you have a set of variables. So you're just increasing the number of variables. Now, identifying images using the raw pixel values are not reliable. As we have seen just now, the values change when the images are translated. It's the same rectangle, we just move by a few pixels, all the pixel values are going to change. If you rotate it, blur it, or scale it, thicken it, you can have different kinds of transformation which are going to change the pixel values. So raw pixel values cannot be used for classifying images. And we need certain features to be extracted from the images which are not so sensitive to these transformation. So we'll see what features can be extracted. Now, before that, some unique characteristics of this image data. So the input variables are ordered in the form of 2 or 3 dimensional matrix. Whereas in all the machine learning applications, problems we saw earlier, we had a flat list of all the input variables. We say X1, X2, X3, speed, swing, and all that. We don't have an order in the arrangement of the input variables. All the variables are randomly ordered. The order is not important. Whereas in the case of an image, we arrange the variables in a certain form because that in the because the adjacency information between pixels, between the variables, that determines some important features. So variables are ordered, unlike a normal machine learning application where the variables are unordered. So we have variables which are ordered in the form of 2 or 3 dimensional matrix. 2-dimensional matrix in the case of bitmap. And when a 3-dimensional matrix, when you have different color channels, we can arrange it in the form of 3-dimensional matrix. So there is some order information which we have to make use of to learn correctly. And the relationship between adjacent pixels determine features such as edges. So this is also very important. In the standard machine learning problem, we don't have any adjacency information between variables. Whereas in the case of images, the relationship between adjacent pixels determine the presence of features. Pixels that are far away need not be related strongly. And in the case of images, we provide a priori information about which variables are related. So learning can be simplified by looking for relationship only between those variables alone. It reduces the number of parameters to be trained. If you use normal machine learning for this kind of application, let's say you create a hidden layer with 1024 hidden nodes. And if you look at all possible interconnection between the input layer, hidden layer, and output layer, so from between the input layer and the hidden layer itself, we have 1024 multiplied by 1024. We have 1 million possible connections between the first 2 layers. That means you have 1 million weight factors to be learned. You can see, it cannot learn 1 million weight factors. It's not going to be reliable. Similarly, from the hidden layer to the output layer, again, you might have 1024 multiplied by the number of classes. You have large number of connections, and this number of connections determine the number of free parameters in the model. So it can learn incorrect relationship if it doesn't have enough number of data points. So the learning is not very reliable in the conventional machine learning techniques like neural network, when you don't take advantage of the relationship, knowledge about the relationship between variables. So this is what I mentioned just now. If you take an image of 200 by 200 with 3 color channels, you have so many input variables and fully connected layer. For one, this is for one node. You have 120,000 weights. If you have n number of such nodes in the layer, you multiply by so much. So many weights have to be determined. So now the question is, what can we do to simplify the learning? So we want to find out, what exactly are relationship between variables in the case of images. I've shown a bitmap image here. I put let us say it's a grayscale image where the pixel values range from 0 to 255. 255 means it is white, 0 means it is black. So I have a set of values for each of the pixels. And I want you to tell me whether there is an edge within that image. If this is a bitmap, I want you to tell me whether there is a horizontal or a vertical edge in this image. Can somebody
Yes,
tell?
there are edges. Yeah.
Yeah, where is the edge?
Third column in the first matrix.
Right. So you can see,
it's a diagonal.
Right.
Next
So
one is
here,
diagonal.
yeah. So here you can see there is an edge. You have all the white pixels here. These are gray pixels. Suddenly, gray has become white. So that's a vertical edge in this image. And in this image, similarly, there is a diagonal. The diagonal along which all the pixels are white, the others are gray. So there is an edge in this the second image, it's a diagonal, whereas in the first one is the vertical edge. You can also have images with horizontal edges and so on. Now, how do you find out whether there is an edge? By looking at it, you are able to immediately tell there is an edge. What you did was probably compared the adjacent pixel values. So the 100 suddenly became 255 and then dropped to 100. So if you take the difference between the next pixel value and the previous pixel value, you get 255 minus 100. So there is a change. This is nothing but the gradient, delta y by delta x. So when you compute the slope or the gradient, you can determine the presence of an edge in this image. Take the next pixel value and subtract from the previous pixel value. If you get a value greater than 0, so if you take the first two, when you do this subtraction, it is 0. I mean, there is no gradient, there is no slope, there is no edge. Whereas when it comes to this point, there is a difference which indicate there is an edge at that location. And if that pattern is repeated many times, we can be more confident and say that there is an edge at that location. Now, how do we do this mathematically? We can write it as a matrix operation like this. It is not the normal dot product which you have learned in matrix multiplication, but it is something similar. You have a matrix here containing these values -1, 0, 1, -1, 0, and you have a matrix. All you do is you multiply each element with the corresponding element in your bitmap. So when you apply it to this matrix here, you take this matrix, multiply each element by this operator is called as a mask, and you take the sum. So basically what you're doing is you're taking the next value, multiply by 1, take the previous value, multiply by -1, take the sum. So you are finding the difference between the next value and the previous value. So this is the central definition. You can compute derivative using the central definition. You take the next value, subtract from the -1. So this is nothing but computing the derivative. So there is you repeat 3 times for the 3 rows. You take the next value, subtract from the previous value, and then you sum all these together. And if this operation gives a high value, that means that there's an edge at that point. So this determines whether there is a vertical edge at that point. Similarly, you can do it for a horizontal edge. You take the next pixel, subtract it from the previous pixel, sum it up, and then you repeat it 3 times and add all these together. If you get a high value, that means you have a horizontal edge. So this is called the Prewitt operator for detecting horizontal and vertical edges. Any questions? Is it clear? This Prewitt operator? Okay, now what about, the same thing, I applied to this matrix. This is the vertical mask. So at each, so you need 3 pixels. So you can only start from this point. At this point, you take this matrix, multiply by this matrix. You take the corresponding element and multiply and add. This is what you get. You get 465, which means that high value, which means that there is an edge at this location. There is a gradient. The pixel value changes from 100 to 255. So you have a difference of 155 multiplied by 3, you get 465. So by looking at applying this derivative mask to the entire image, you can find locations within the image which has a vertical mask. Similarly, you can do it for the horizontal mask. Now, if you want to find out whether there are edges in the diagonal direction, you can use a slightly different mask. It is not 1 and -1. So here you can see here you have along the diagonal, you have 1 and -1. So you subtract this pixel value with this pixel value. If there is a change in the pixel value, that means there is the edge in the diagonal direction. Similarly, there is more weight for this diagonal, +2, -2, and then you take the sum of all that. You see whether there is a diagonal in the northwest direction. Similarly, an inclined edge in the southwest direction, and you can define different kinds of mask to determine whether there is an edge in different direction. Now, if you compare all these different masks, Prewitt mask, the vertical one, horizontal one, vertical one, and so on, and then this Robinson mask and all that. So when you look at all this, finally you are using some matrix containing a number of values. The difference between all these masks are you have different values at each position in the matrix, but finally it is just a matrix, and it is just a matrix operation. So now, if you want to learn the presence of edges in all possible direction, all you need to do is, instead of hard coding these values 2, 1, 0, 1, -1, and so on, you just treat it as a variable. So you take a matrix W1, W2, W3. These are, we don't know what should be these W1, W2, W3. These are like our weight factors in our neural network. So we take these as unknown variables and try to find out what should be these values of W1, W2, and W3, such that in images belonging to the same class, you have the same feature, and images belonging to an opposite class, you have a different value when you take the operation, right? So this is that idea that you can treat this as weight factors. This, instead of hard coding the mask, if you hard code the mask, you are using predefined features. So you can either look for a horizontal edge or a vertical edge or an edge in a particular direction. But you can use weight factors as unknown variables in this matrix and try to learn it. When you do that, you are automatically learning features which are not hard-coded in your model. So this is the idea that the CNN uses. Somebody asked a question, okay, after multiplying with the vertical mass, a resulting matrix should also be in the format. Okay, so what I have done here, so what you do is you apply this mask for this matrix, so you get one value 465. Now you repeat for the next matrix. You take another 3 by 3 matrix, multiply by the same matrix, you get the value 0. Now you repeat for the next one, you get minus 465 and so on. And then you can move horizontally. You can move this window horizontally from left to right, and you can also move the window vertically from left to right. And at each point, you find out what is the total sum. So you get another matrix, another bitmap, which is we call it as a filter. So we get another, you get a filtered image, and this image determines the presence of edges in this bitmap. And high value, right? I'm coming to the high value later on, and in a short while I'm going to discuss that. Okay, this is a small exercise. We want you can do it. I have put the link in the exercise sheet. I have put this link, so you can. It's a small exercise to understand what you have understood. So you can do that. I'm just going to continue because we have only 10 more minutes. To summarize, each filter involves a weighted sum of the pixels in the neighborhood. Is the inner product of the weight matrix and the input matrix. The weights determine what type of edges are detected, and the mask is convolved. It's called the convolution operator. You move from left to right and top to bottom. So the same mask is applied to different parts of the image. So that is called as the convolution operator. You will understand this if you read about convolution. It's an idea which is there in signal processing. So it's the same operation, it's simple operation. You just move the window from left to right and repeat the same operation from left to right and top to bottom. So that is a convolution operator. And that's how we get the term CNN, convolutional neural network. And the process results in a feature map, which indicates whether there is a particular feature present at each pixel point. Now, if you have detected edges within two images, how do we determine whether the images are same or similar? This is what the neural network is trying to learn. So now I'll introduce this convolution neural network. We have a sequence of layers, each transforming one volume to the other. To start with, you have the input volume. The input volume contains the original image bitmap. So if it has 3 color channels, it has a depth of 3. And so this is a 3-dimensional matrix. That's why it is called as a volume instead of an area. You have an input image, which is a volume having different channels, having a certain depth. And this is that weight matrix. So we saw the 2-dimensional weight matrix, the Prewitt operator, Soibel operator, the Robinson mask. These are examples of weight matrix with specific values. But if you want a general weight matrix with unknown values for W1, W2, and W3, you can define a 2-dimensional weight matrix. Now you can define multiple the weight matrices, each to learn a separate feature. So this weight matrix is also 3-dimensional. So let's say you have 3 by 3 for learning one particular feature. You have another 3 by 3 matrix for learning maybe vertical feature, 3 by 3 for learning an inclined edge, and so on. In general, we don't even know what these features represent, what these weight factors represent. It represents some feature. It could be a horizontal edge, it could be a vertical edge, it could be an inclined edge. It doesn't matter. So we define this as a weight matrix, the three-dimensional matrix. And now when you apply this operator to the input volume, you get an output volume. At each pixel point, I've shown in 2 dimension how it works. And this you repeat for each channel. So across the depth also, you get you get a bitmap, a feature map having a certain input volume. So this is the idea. So we have a sequence of layers. Each layer transform one input volume to another. And the height, width, and depth could be different for the input volume. And these are 3 types of layers in the CNN. The first is called the convolution layer, which we have seen now. Next, we have a pooling layer. In the pooling layer, we aggregate all the information which you get from the convolution layer. We are not really interested in whether there is pixel at whether there is an the edge at a particular pixel location. As long as there is an edge somewhere in the image, we are okay with that. So what you can do is we can do a downsampling instead of some 1024 pixel points, looking at the values at each of these pixel points, 1024 pixel points. We can select a subset of this. Maybe you divide the image into 4 quadrants, and as long as there is an edge in one of the quadrants, it determines something important. So we say we select only 4 pixel points from these 1024. So within the first quadrant, as long as you have some value which is greater than a threshold, we are okay with it. So you take the maximum from the first quadrant, similarly maximum from the second quadrant, and so on. So you perform a downsampling operation. This is called the max pool operation. You select the maximum from a selected window, and that will become the output from the pooling layer. So from the pooling layer, after you apply the pooling operation, you select the maximum from the selected window. So you reduce the number of variables, and then you can have a fully connected layer in which these variables are connected. So this can be an ordinary neural network. It can be a perceptron network. It can even be a support vector machine. You can learn what is the relationship between the output classes versus these features which have been extracted using the convolution layer and the pooling layer. Okay, so the fully connected layer, the final layer computes the final class score, resulting in a volume of 1 times 1 times p is 1 dimensional, where p is the number of classes. So this is the basic idea of convolution neural network. So what we have is a neural network in which we make use of adjacency information. This weight matrix is the same, which is convolved over the entire image. So you don't have one you don't have separate weight factors for every pair of connections from the input layer to the hidden layer. So you reduce the number of weight factors. And then we have the pooling layer here, which will further reduce the number of weight factors that have to be learned. And then you have the output layer. So this is the structure of a deep learning network used for recognizing images. Okay, so now I need to stop because I need to give you some time for a break before we resume. So any quick question before in the afternoon we get more time to ask questions, but meanwhile, any quick questions you have? How can we feed RGB values? Yes, you can. All you need to do is see, images are anyway stored in RGB format most of the time, or you can convert it. So you have the red value, green value, and blue value for every pixel in the representation. The standard bitmap representation automatically the represented the RGB values. So we try to take it as 3 different variables at each pixel location. We have 3 values, one for the red, one for green, one for blue. So these are 3 separate variables, and you repeat the same operation for each of these variables. So these three variables become the depth of the input volume and repeat the convolution operation for each of these variables. Is that clear?
Sir, how
Okay.
do we define the region with respect to the convolution layer? Because see, if image is there, there are background is there, trees are there, roads are there, buildings are there, right? So region identification.
Identification of the region in the image, that is another
Right.
machine learning problem. That's
Okay.
another the problem. So once you have identified the region, we're looking at how we can identify features, edges, and so on. But that itself, in identifying the region itself, is another optimization problem, another machine learning problem. Okay, so we will take maybe just a 10-minute break. At 11:05, we'll reconvene for the next session.